And the Oscar goes to...
The Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
The year is 1936. It is March 5th. It's the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles, and it's the 8th Academy Awards. Way back when, in the day, this ceremony was hosted by Frank Capra, who lived from 1897 to 1991. Now, he was the creative force behind some of the most major award-winning films of the 1930s and 40s. When I personally think of Frank Capra, and when you think of Frank Capra, I really honestly think, for the most part, one movie comes to mind, and that's It's a Wonderful Life, the Christmas tradition movie. It was also the first year, how about this, the first year in which the gold statuettes were called Oscars. So Oscars debuted in 1936, and it took, I don't know how many years for the Academy Awards ceremony to be actually called the Oscars, even though people called them the Oscars. It wasn't officially known as the Oscars until really kind of somewhat recently. The category Best Dance Direction was introduced that year. Now, of course, that nowhere near exists anymore. The Directors Guild lobbied successfully for its elimination 3 years later, so it only lasted a couple of years. Mutiny on the Bounty became the last film to date to win Best Picture and absolutely nothing else. Broadway Melody, the 1929 Broadway Melody, Grand Hotel were the other two. That happened prior to this win. And that'd be something else if a movie won Best Picture and won absolutely no other awards. That'd be just unheard of, especially the fact that they have 24 categories now. 3 nominations for Best Actor for Mutiny on the Bounty. That's unheard of as well. It was the second and last year that write-in votes were allowed. Midsummer Night's Dream was the only film to win a write-in Oscar for Best Cinematography. The nominee Sherry Shords was the only woman nominated in the short-lived Best Assistant Director category. They gave an Academy Honorary Award out to D.W. Griffith, who lived from 1875 to 1948. The Oscars debuted after his heyday. He's known as the inventor of Hollywood, and his most famous movie, probably Birth of a Nation back in 1915. Definitely controversial and not anywhere near politically correct in 2016. I shouldn't even say politically correct. It's out and out, probably viewed as a racist movie in that it gives a glowing light to the Ku Klux Klan, which is probably not the best. He also did a movie called Intolerance in 1916. These are movies that I've seen both of them, but it's been so darn long, probably at least 10 years. I'd have to go back and revisit them, but obviously I'm not going to be revisiting them during this project since none of them made it to the time frame of the Oscars. Griffith was given the award for distinguished creative achievements like director, producer, and his valuable initiative and lasting contributions to the progress of the motion picture arts. I mean, as controversial as his movies turned out to be in later years, I mean, he was definitely an innovator and one of the fathers of Hollywood for sure. You can't really take that away from him. Multiple nominations and awards. The most nominations went to Mutiny on the Bounty, which got 8. Lives of a Bengal Lancer, 7. The Informer got 6. The Informer also won 4 awards. That won the most awards of the year. Midsummer's Night's Dream won 2 awards. We have a lot of movies to get through for the 1936 Academy Awards. We have 12 nominations, and those movies are the winner, Mutiny on the Bounty, Alice Adams, Broadway Melody of 1936, Captain Blood, David Copperfield, The Informer, Les Miserables, The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Naughty Marietta, Ruggles of Red Gap, and Top Hat. So let's get into it.
Murdering butcher. I've had enough of this bloodship. He's the master of life and death on the quarterdeck above the angels. McCoy, Cleo! I'm sick of blood. Bloody backs, bloody faces. Why are you giving your last command on this ship? We'll be men to get up we hang for it.
Casting me adrift 3,500 miles from a port of call. You're sending me to my doom, eh? Well, you're wrong, Christian. I'll take this boat as she floats to England if I must. I'll live to see you, all of you, hanging from the highest yard arm in the British fleet.
It's the Best Picture winner for the 8th Academy Awards, Mutiny on the Bounty from 1935, a drama film done by MGM starring Charles Laughton, English stage and film character actor, director, producer, and screenwriter, who's actually in a few films that were nominated for Best Picture this year. We'll get into the others coming up. Also starring the very handsome Clark Gable, referred to as the King of Hollywood, or just simply the King. Clark Gable basically just a kind of a swashbuckling hero in this movie and in many other films. Movie was directed by Frank Lloyd, not to be confused with Frank Lloyd Wright, who was actually among the founders of the AMPAs and president from 1934 to 1935, the Motion Picture Association. The movie was, of course, based on a novel, the novel Mutiny on the Bounty by Charles Nordhoff and James Norman Hall, and it was one of the biggest hits of all time. It was basically just one of the big-time blockbuster films of 1935. Historical accuracy, though, was questioned, but film critics consider it the best cinematic work inspired by the mutiny. Obviously, you got to take some liberties when you're putting things to the screen to make it a little more interesting. As far as the plot of Mutiny on the Bounty, it's based on the 1789 ship mutiny. Clark Gable stars as Fletcher Christian. He's the first mate of the infamous HMS Bounty, which was skippered by Captain William Bligh, excellently portrayed by Charles Laughton. Now, the cruelest taskmaster was Bligh on the entire seven seas. His villain knows no bounds. He's even willing to flog a dead man if it strengthens his hold over his crew. Christian despises Bligh, and then mutiny happens later, after a bunch of events. So that's kind of the gist of the plot. Great movie. We'll get into the review coming up in just a bit. As far as historical inaccuracies, Bligh was never on board the HMS Pandora, which happens at the end of the movie after he's cast out to sea. He finds his way to land, and then, according to the movie, he's back aboard another ship, being the captain of that, and probably flogging dead people there, too. He was also not present at the trial of the mutineers who stayed on Tahiti in the movie. So that's another kind of thing to maybe spice up the plot a little bit. Bligh never flogged a dead man, which I just mentioned. And he never did keel hauling, which is dragging along the keel. Gable had to reluctantly shave off his famous mustache because sailors in the Royal Navy in the 18th century had to be clean-shaven. So that trademark Clark Gable mustache is not in this movie. Kind of looks a little weird without it. He looks actually a little like George Clooney in this movie, I think, without his mustache. As far as the production of the film, James Cagney, and I didn't spot this when I saw the movie. He was then on hiatus from Warner Brothers for contract disputes, and also David Niven and Dick Hames. They were all uncredited extras in this movie. I got to find where they were. I didn't really spot them. I wasn't really looking for them, but didn't spot them nonetheless. Now, this is a really interesting story. Charles Laughton was a very good stage actor, very English proper kind of guy, but he wasn't a very good-looking guy. As a matter of fact, he was not good-looking at all. And due to this, he had a really bad self-image complex. I mean, he really wasn't able to embrace, like so many people have a gift of, when they're not blessed with good looks, they embrace the fact that they're not, according to the public eye. But he had a really tough time doing this, and he had a very severe self-image complex concerning his weight as well, and his unattractive looks, and it suffered really horribly because Clark Gable was probably one of the most attractive leading men in Hollywood. Oh, he's definitely one of the most attractive leading men in Hollywood at the time, and he had a really tough time acting with Clark Gable because of the difference in looks. Now, Laughton would actually watch his own walk, gestures, and face, making sure not to let his complex be projected. So he had such a complex that he feared that it would show on film that he was kind of maybe, I don't want to say in awe of Clark Gable, but maybe just jealous. And he's supposed to be this commander guy who's not afraid of Clark Gable's character. So it kind of makes sense there. As far as the reception, the contemporary reviews are very, very positive. The movie earned $2,250,000 in the U.S. and Canada, and $2,210,000 elsewhere, resulting in a profit of $909,000. The proposed sequels, they actually had wanted to do a sequel in 1940 Lloyd was reported as wanting to make a film about the life of Bligh, starring Spencer Tracy, or maybe bring back Charles Lawton, which would have made more sense. You always want to bring back the original. Didn't get green-lighted by Universal, however. Then in 1945, it was reported that MGM would make a sequel with Clark Gable called Christian of the Bounty, based on his romantic adventures in England and South America. That was scrapped as well. Plenty of parodies done on this film. Bugs Bunny did parodies, Lost in Space, The Simpsons. They're all out there. So let's get into our review now of Mutiny on the Bounty. I give the plot a 5 out of 5. It is a perfect plot, in my opinion. It really captures the story of the struggle between Bligh and Fletcher, and Bligh and the rest of the crew, and Fletcher and the rest of the crew, and the struggles of the rest of the crew as well. Great building up of events, kind of just things escalating and getting into the mutiny, which is the main purpose of the movie. And it really wraps up greatly. It's a crowd-pleasing wrap-up, but it's also one that satisfies plausibility as well. I think it's just a great, solid plot throughout. I don't really see anything that I can kind of gripe about, so I give that a 5 out of 5. The acting, I'm giving a 3.5 out of 5. I thought Lawton as Captain Bligh was the standout. He's mean in almost a childlike way. I thought he almost seems like a little boy who just wants what he wants all the time and gets what he wants all the time, and he doesn't care about anyone else. Gable, I thought, was solid, but a little one-dimensionally heroic. I just think that, and this is an issue, obviously, with the early movies, is you have these one-dimensional heroes that are just basically, all good and not much depth to them. So I thought Gable was good, but just a little too heroic, I think. Franchot Tone, who plays Roger Byam in the movie. I didn't get into his character too much, but he was really a great role in this movie. He plays a man who's, I believe, a lieutenant or a midshipman or something like that, and he's kind of torn between his friendship of Clark Gable's character and his sense of duty to William Bligh and the British Navy. So he's kind of torn the whole way through, and it really is a great role and a great acting job as well. As far as the directing and cinematography, I give that a 5 out of 5. I thought for 1935, just excellent. Kind of reminded me of the cinematography that was displayed from Wings. Not quite as impressive as that cinematography, but really great shots of the sea. Great, well done with the storms as well. The ship was really well done. Great ship. Ship scenes were spectacular. The scenes in Tahiti were phenomenal as well. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give it 2.5 out of 5. I don't really remember the music. I just remember the Rule Britannia song being played a bunch of times. And I don't really remember much of the music, mostly incidental, I suppose. And nothing detrimental, nothing I thought that took away from the movie at all, just nothing too memorable. I think it could have used a more sweeping score. I think if it was made in modern times, you'd get John Williams or someone like that to make a more sweeping score. So 2.5 for soundtrack. And the overall aura of the movie, I give a 4.5 out of 5. It was a great epic of the seas. The hardship of the crew and the duty of the crew and following orders almost kind of puts you in mind of the Nazis following orders in World War II, almost. Like, where do you draw the line? I mean, where does it come? Where does it come where you draw the line? And I think that this movie really depicts that really well. So 4.5 out of 5 for overall aura. So let's tabulate the results here of Mutiny on the Bounty. We have a 5 for plot. We have a 3.5 for acting. We have a 5 for directing, cinematography. We have a 2.5 for soundtrack and a 4.5 for aura, giving Mutiny on the Bounty a 20.5 out of 25 and a score of 82.
A girl from the wrong side of the tracks find happiness with a man from the right side?
If you want our summer evenings to be over, you'll have to drive me away yourself.
No one else could.
No one.
Well, I will.
See for yourself with 4-time Academy Award winner Katharine Hepburn in the Oscar-nominated treasure, Alice Adams.
The 1935 romantic film Alice Adams, which was made by RKO and starring Katharine Hepburn in one of her early roles. Katharine Hepburn, a little bit of a different Katharine Hepburn than we'd be used to later in her career. This movie was directed by George Stevens, who lived from 1904 to 1975. He also directed A Place in the Sun in 1951, Shane in 1953, Giant in 1956, as well as The Diary of Anne Frank in 1959. They were his most notable films. It was produced by Pedro S. Berman. The screenplay was by Dorothy Yost, Mortimer Offner, and Jane Murfin, and it was adapted from the novel Alice Adams from Booth Tarkington, who also did The Magnificent Ambersons, probably his most famous work. Music score by Max Steiner and Roy Webb. Now, Max Steiner, one of the big-time composers. I guess you could maybe call him the John Williams of the early days of movies. He composed over 300 film scores. As a matter of fact, it was nominated for 24 Academy Awards, winning 3. Roy Webb was known for film noir and horror film scores, so they collaborated on this one. Definitely not a film noir or horror film. A cinematography done by Robert DeGrassi. And this film is about a young woman who's played by Katharine Hepburn in kind of a medium-sized and maybe small town in the U.S. in the early 1900s, and her pretentious attempts to appear upper class and wed a wealthy man while concealing her poverty. Not concealing it very well, in my opinion. Now, Katharine Hepburn had some popularity by being in the movie Morning Glory in 1933, and it was an Oscar-winning performance, but her celebrity kind of died down. As quickly as it rose up, it died down, and this movie kind of resurrected her career at an early age. I mean, she was only like 25 or 26 years old, but this movie kind of, maybe you could basically call it a stepping stone to some of her later work in the decades. So without this movie, we might not be talking about Katharine Hepburn the way we usually do. It also stars Fred MacMurray from My Three Sons. Remember the father from My Three Sons? He plays Arthur Russell. He was very young back then. Of course, he's well known in the movie world for the movie Double Indemnity, a great movie. I can't wait to get around to reviewing that, which hopefully was nominated. I don't even know if it was nominated for Best Picture. Hopefully it was. Fred Stone plays Mr. Adams, who's the father of Katharine Hepburn's character. And Evelyn Venable is an actress and also the voice model for the Blue Fairy in Pinocchio. She was in this movie as well, playing kind of a hoity-toity type, which I believe she was playing Fred MacMurray's sister in the movie. It was nominated for Best Picture, and Hepburn was also nominated for Best Actress. She received the second most votes for Best Actress after Bette Davis won Best Actress that year for the movie Dangerous, a movie that we're not going to be reviewing. Kind of interesting, because there's 11 or 12 nominees this year. Second adaptation of the novel, they actually did an Alice Adams movie back in 1923, a silent film. Hepburn wanted George Cukor to direct this film, but he was busy making David Copperfield, which we will be reviewing a little bit later on. A lot of significant differences from the novel. I won't go into that. Don't think it's really appropriate for the movie. $64,000 profit, which I guess was a lot of money back in 1935. So getting into the review of Alice Adams from 1935. As far as the plot goes, I'm going to give the plot a 3.5 out of 5. I thought really a solid plot the whole way through. I really like the way that they kind of scripted Arthur, played by Fred MacMurray, to be kind of silent and just kind of soak it all in. I mean, Katharine Hepburn's character was really attempting to dupe him into thinking that she was a little bit higher class, I guess you could say, than she ended up being. But it was really kind of a see-through thing where you just knew she was making everything up. And I think his character knew it, and they do a good job kind of playing that up throughout the entire movie. Also, really great illustration of the class system in early 20th century America, and the importance of status, social status, to prolong your lineage. A little bit confused. There was a story about Hepburn's father basically creating a kind of glue or something like that, and going into business for himself at the urge of his kind of nagging wife, I guess you could say. There was also a story about how his boss, who I guess was kind of nice to him, giving him money even though he was out with illness a lot of the time. A story about his boss also inventing this type of glue, and they had a big falling out, and I just didn't think the story, to me, I could not really follow it really well. So there was a little bit of, to me, a plot hole in that. Also, the mother, a little bit one-dimensional. She's very nagging as far as, you need to be in a better social class. You need to go into business, blah, blah, blah. And we don't ever know if she found the light in the movie. I don't know if she ever had that come to Jesus moment in the movie. They just seem to tie things up without her saying, you know what, it's all about family, which I guess should be the moral of the story. The acting, I'm going to give the acting 4 out of 5. I thought Katharine Hepburn was spectacular. Now, I'm going to be reviewing a ton of Katharine Hepburn movies throughout this project, but the ones that I have seen with her, I've seen the heavy hitters, of course, and I had never been a huge Katharine Hepburn fan. Maybe I will change my mind on repeat viewings of other movies, but she was really good. She kind of played a drama queen, which is not quite the Katharine Hepburn role that you kind of think of when you think of Katharine Hepburn, but she did a great job playing the ruse really well. McMurray was very stoic. He doesn't say much in the movie, but he's there. The brother, I kind of like the brother's character, very nonchalant, and there was a dinner scene in the movie as well, where they're eating all this hot food in the middle of a really hot heat wave, which I thought was pretty darn funny. The father, I thought the actor who plays the father overacted a little bit, but in a humble way. Kind of an endearing acting job, so I'm kind of torn between, did he overact, or was it just that kind of endearing job? No one does that better, by the way, than Spencer Tracy. He doesn't overact, he's very endearing, and he also seems very believable as a real person. The guy who played the father in this movie, not quite believable, but still, you kind of embrace him, I think. As far as the directing and cinematography, I give it a 3 out of 5. I thought the dinner scene was very well constructed, well filmed, and just all in all, just a funny bit. Totally funny bit. And I really like kind of the illustration, the porch. A lot of scenes happening on the porch, and then the scenes happening inside. And there's a definite difference of the porch and the inside of the house, meaning that the porch represents kind of the ruse going on, that she's part of an upper class system, and she's very confident in her lie that she's telling Fred McMurray's character that she's a little better off than she is. But inside the house, things are a little bit different. Things are more humble. That's where they basically meet the family, or he meets the family. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give a 3 out of 5. Good use of the first dance song throughout. Now, what I mean by that is they go to a dance, a really elegant kind of ball dance in the early going of this film, and Fred McMurray's character dances with Katharine Hepburn's character to a certain song, and that song kind of is brought with you the entire rest of the way in this movie, and it rehashes itself a bunch of times all throughout. Not much memorable music other than that, but that is basically the main theme of the movie. As far as the overall aura of the film, that gets my lowest score. That gets a 2.5 out of 5, I think. I think the theme is a lasting theme. It could have tied up a little better at the end with a little more of something that sticks with you, but it was kind of almost like a sitcom ending where just everything just ties up perfectly, and you're kind of just like, all right, this is not plausible. Also, some things don't really stand the test of time. There's some really rough racist dialogue, and I know it's a sign of the times, obviously. It's not like this film was made in 2016, but the portrayals of African Americans in this movie are going to be a little bit startling, I think, to most. So that kind of knocks it off for that. So Ari gets a 2.5 out of 5. So let's run down our scores here. We have 3.5 for plot, we have 4 for acting, 3 for directing/cinematography, 3 for soundtrack and sound editing, and 2.5 for aura, giving Alice Adams' 1935 film a 64.
Ring us round to old Broadway. You got a clown on Broadway. Your troubles there.
Wait, hold that song. That was a grand song. Broadway melody, you remember it. But now we're ready with the new and greater Broadway melody. So new, in fact, that it's a year ahead. So off with the old, on with the new. You have it, Francis Langford. Take it away.
You are my lucky star. I saw you from afar.
All right, it's the Broadway melody of 1936. They released a bunch of Broadway melody films in many years in the early days of the talkies of Hollywood, kind of to showcase the musical skills, dancing skills, and whatnot of performers. This one was released by MGM, and the film opened at the Capitol Theater in New York City, the site of a lot of prestigious MGM premieres. And it's kind of a follow-up of sorts to the successful 1929 Broadway melody. No story connection to that film whatsoever, but kind of the same idea as far as kind of a plot used to service the musical numbers. The Broadway Melody of 1929, by the way, was the first talkie to win Best Picture. It actually won the second ever Best Picture Oscar. It was written by Harry W. Kahn, the Broadway Melody of 1936 I'm talking about. Also Moss Hart, Jack McGowan, and Sid Silvers. And it was directed by Roy Del Ruth. It stars Jack Benny. Jack Benny, radio icon and comedian Jack Benny. He plays Bert Keeler, a kind of a reporter, kind of a gossip radio show host, I should say. Access Hollywood from 1936. Eleanor Powell, who is a dancer-actress, or was a dancer-actress. She plays Irene Foster. Robert Taylor plays Robert Gordon. One of the more popular leading men of the time was Robert Taylor. And Frances Langford, who was a popular dancer during the golden age of radio. She was popular during then. She plays herself. Popular singer, I should say. Silvers, just Silvers, Sid Silvers, plays Snoot Blue, who is kind of Jack Benny's sidekick, comical relief sidekick. And introducing Buddy and Vilma Ebsen. Buddy Ebsen from, of course, the Beverly Hillbillies. That's what he's most known for, but rather young and rather sprightly. Buddy Ebsen, what a dancer. A brother-sister combo, Buddy and Vilma Ebsen. Now, in an interview promoting Nats Entertainment 3, Ann Miller, who's a dancer and actress, stated that MGM was actually on the verge of bankruptcy at the time. And this film, along with subsequent films that starred Eleanor Powell, were so successful that the company was rescued and, of course, became wildly successful. So we can kind of credit this film as helping out MGM. Now, remember, Samuel Goldwyn was the originator of the Oscars. So I'm wondering if this movie flopped and there was the bankruptcy in the making for MGM, would the Oscars not have happened in subsequent years? I'm sure maybe the Golden Globes would have taken the place of the Oscars as the most important night for Hollywood. Now, here's the plot. Jack Benny is cast as a Walter Winchell type. He carries on a feud with Broadway producer Robert Taylor. So he's like a radio show host, Jack Benny is, who basically is doing nothing but mundane reporting of couples having babies and stuff like that, and that's all his show's about. His boss comes down on him and says, you need to be more entertaining. I don't care whether or not that comes at the expense of you getting thrown in the who's gal, but you need to come up with something that's a little more, that the listeners are going to like a little more. Now, into the frame comes Taylor's childhood sweetheart, Eleanor Powell, who wants a role in Taylor's upcoming production, and already under fire from Benny for exhibiting favoritism, Taylor says no. So that's a big plot point. A lot of stuff happens. Taylor tries to get into this play that he's throwing by being dressed in disguise as some fake performer, and it's basically just to service the music. I mean, there are a lot of musical numbers, obviously, in this, and the plot is very important. Just the music and the choreography. Powell's first leading role and first film for MGM. She appeared in the next two Broadway melodies in the series. I believe 38 and 40 were the next two. Buddy Ebsen's film debut, as well, as I just mentioned. And even though dubbed by Marjorie Lane, Eleanor Powell recorded You Are My Lucky Star with Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra. It was released as a single, I believe, back then. As far as the box office goes, as I mentioned, wildly successful. It helped MGM, according to Ann Miller. The film earned $1,655,000 in the U.S. and Canada and $1,216,000 elsewhere, resulting in a profit of $691,000, a pretty decent profit. The one Academy Award that it won in 1936 was the Dance Direction Oscar. That would have been a travesty if it didn't, I guess. Let's go to the review now. The plot. I give the plot a 2.5 out of 5. A fun plot, though unimportant and rather implausible. But who cares? That's not really what the movie's all about. As I mentioned, it's a vehicle to get to the musical numbers. So, and there was a little bit of confusion to me. The final scene, how it quote unquote wraps things up, but I don't see how it wraps things up. But whatever, it's a big dance number, and everyone's happy at the end. The acting, I give it 3 out of 5. I thought Jack Benny was very funny. I thought he was the standout character, showcasing great comedy. Also, there's a guy, I didn't get his name. There's a guy who plays an expert on snoring. And it's kind of a running gag throughout the movie, where he's talking about the different types of snoring and he's making sounds corresponding to these different types of snoring, which is, I thought, pretty amusing, especially for the time. Buddy and Vilma Epson, I said they were very sprightly. They're really great dancers, and they did a good job in a supporting role. I thought the main characters, I thought Robert Taylor's character was very wooden and just not very, you didn't really root for the guy. He almost seemed like a heel in a way in the movie to me, and I just didn't find myself really liking him as much as I did Jack Benny. Also, Powell was a little bit wooden, but she's more of a dancer, I guess, than an actual actress, so I could kind of see why. And her dancing was absolutely phenomenal. Directing and cinematography, I give a 4 out of 5. Fantastic choreography, and the sets were very good. The sets, especially during the musical numbers, were sensational, and there were a couple dreamlike sequences where they had to use the technology of the time to make it seem like the ghosty kind of, like she's stepping out of her body, that kind of thing. A lot of tricks and shadows in those dream sequences. And the in-between scenes were not very, it's not so elaborate and not very, not much to look at. So that's where the 1 star gets knocked off there. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give a 4 out of 5. Great tunes. It's a musical, so you're going to get a lot of music, obviously. My only quip is a little tad repetitive on the main theme of it, You Are My Lucky Star. The only time I had heard someone sing You Are My Lucky Star was at the end of the movie Alien, when Sigourney Weaver's stepping into that suit to fight the alien to blow it out of the airlock. And the aura of the film, 3.5 out of 5. Memorable tunes. Lucky Star song, as I mentioned, a very memorable song. The Gotta Dance song at the end, of course, made a little more famous by Singing in the Rain. Some 20 years or so later, maybe a little less than that, but great song as well. The story itself, not so memorable. It's not meant to be memorable, as I mentioned. So 3.5 for aura. So let's run down the list of our ratings. 2.5 for plot. We have 3 for acting, 4 for dancing, or for directing and cinematography, I should say. 4 for soundtrack and sound editing, and 3.5 for aura, giving the Broadway Melody of 1936 a 17 out of 25 and a score of 68. Swashbuckling icon Errol Flynn's very first movie, Captain Blood, from 1935, a black and white swashbuckler pirate film from First National Pictures as well as Warner Brothers. It was produced by Harry Joe Brown and Gordon Hollingshead. Also, Hal B. Wallace produced Casablanca and True Grit. So he was also had a hand in that movie. Casablanca, a little bit different than Captain Blood. The movie was directed by Michael Curtiz, who also directed Casablanca and Yankee Doodle Dandy, and Mildred Pierce. So some really huge, critically acclaimed movies. Of course, Casablanca, widely considered one of the best movies of all time. Errol Flynn is the star. His very first role as Peter Blood. Errol Flynn, some years later, a couple years later, as a matter of fact, would be in his probably most famous role and most acclaimed role, playing Robin Hood in The Adventures of Robin Hood. Olivia de Havilland, also in that movie. We also knew that she was in 1 or 2 other movies that year. She plays Arabelle Bishop. So really big start to her career, and she is still alive at the time that I'm speaking. So 100 years old for Olivia de Havilland. That's something else. Still living in France as well. Her career spanned from 1935 to 1988. She was in The Adventures of Robin Hood as well as Gone with the Wind. Who could forget her role in that? Another Robin Hood alum, Basil Rathbone, is in Captain Blood. He plays Levasseur. And Ross Alexander, kind of a tragic story. This guy plays Jeremy Pitt, who is Blood's friend and navigator. The actor Ross Alexander shot himself in the head in the barn behind his home, I should say. His wife committed suicide too. Just a real tragic story, and a lot of people considered him one of the more up-and-coming actors, so who knows where his career would have taken him. He died at 30. He was only 30 years old, maybe 29, but he died in 1937. He was born in 1907. The plot of Captain Blood. It was set during the oppressive reign of King James II. I believe back in the 1600s, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Irish physician Peter Blood is condemned to slavery in Jamaica. He's sent over there, and then he earns privileges after threatening the governor, or treating the governor, not threatening the governor, treating the governor for gout, which he did a really good job treating his gout. The governor really liked him, but that did not rest well with the owner of the plantation on which Blood is forced to work. So there's a lot of battle scenes. The Spanish come to try to take the city. Blood escapes. He steals a Spanish ship, and he becomes basically a really well-known pirate on the seas. And they actually end up capturing his captors, led by Olivia de Havilland. And they kind of have a torrid kind of love affair, and then lots of stuff happens after that. They have a lot of battle scenes in the water, and I won't go into much detail as far as what happens after that in case you want to see the film. Some production notes. It was the first movie made, or the first time it was made as a silent film in 1923, I should say. And then it was remade after the popularity of Treasure Island and The Count of Monte Cristo. They kind of resurrected and revived the swashbuckler genre back in the 30s. Some of the sea battle footage was from a movie in 1924 called The Seahawk, so you're getting some stock footage in this movie as well. It got nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Writing, and Sound Editing. And the musical score was by Eric Wolfgang Korngold, one of the founders of film music, they call this guy. And the main theme of Captain Blood is pretty catchy. If you hear it a bunch of times, it kind of gets stuck in your head a little bit. As far as this Eric Wolfgang Korngold guy goes, he also did, I believe, the score for a movie that we're going to be reviewing in just a bit called A Midsummer Night's Dream, based on the Shakespeare play. And he spent a lot of time adapting works from another artist. In this movie, I found out on the DVD, I did take a view of the extras. They have a little short documentary about the making of the film. This guy, Korngold, apparently was given 3 weeks' notice. He wanted to do the score of this film right after he wrapped up with the Midsummer Night's Dream. He wanted to do the score of this film, and he had 3 weeks to do so. So in 3 weeks, he orchestrated the entire soundtrack and recorded the entire soundtrack. It's absolutely amazing. The production budget of this film was nearly $1 million, which was a lot back then. And the lead role originally offered, they took a pretty big risk here with Errol Flynn. It was originally offered to Robert Donat, who was in The Count of Monte Cristo, but he turned down the role due to the physical demands affecting his asthma. He had bad asthma. The screen test led to Errol Flynn, who was virtually an unknown actor. And alongside him, as I mentioned, Olivia de Havilland was cast in her first role. Jean Muir was originally picked to play opposite Robert Donat, but after she turned it down, the studio focused on de Havilland. So you had unknowns. You had Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland starring in this major budget blockbuster film. Now, Flynn had some problems during filming. He collapsed from a bout of malaria, which he first contracted in New Guinea. And it was a big hit. Big hit. The movie came out, big hit for Warner Brothers, making them a profit of $1.462 million. It spawned a radio adaptation, which was also on the DVD. I didn't get a chance to listen to it. I figured it really wouldn't really affect the movie that much, but they did have a radio play on the February 27th, 1937 broadcast of the Lux Radio Theater with Flynn, de Havilland, and Rathbone all reprising their film parts, so they didn't have other actors stepping in to play them. Let's get to our review now of Captain Blood. For the plot, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Good job coinciding with history. It really depicts the struggle well, and some plot twists, too. There's an invasion by the French at the end when they're going back to Jamaica, and it kind of throws the plot into a bit of a tizzy, if you will. However, I do believe the plot gets a little lost in formulaic swashbuckling. You know, Flynn is the unflinching hero, he wins all the time, and the love story, too, is a little bit muddling as well. It's not really, it doesn't really have an authentic feel to it to me. As far as the acting goes, I give it a 2.5 out of 5. I think Basil Rathbone is really, really good as a villain. He and Charles Lawton, I mean, just the quintessential villains of the 1930s so far, especially this year, 1935. Ross Alexander was great, too. There's a part in the movie where he's basically chained to the stake, basically, and he's really, he just does a really great job of just emotional anguish. I thought Flynn was solid throughout the movie, but a little one-dimensionally heroic, as I mentioned before. And Olivia de Havilland in her first role, very beautiful, very reserved as well. Just really didn't stand out acting-wise as much as she did looks-wise on the screen, in my opinion. Directing and cinematography, I give a 3 out of 5. I thought the fight scenes were very well choreographed. There's a duel scene between Errol Flynn's blood character as well as Basil Rathbone. Very good scene. Some muddling love scenes, though, coupled with the stock footage of the Seahawk. I don't like the use of stock footage. I know back in the day they used to use a lot of that, but I just don't like it. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give a 3.5 out of 5. The rousing theme music, especially the opening song, really gets stuck in your head, as I mentioned, and it pushes the action pretty well. Not much else other than good incidental music, as well as a really good theme song. The overall aura, I only give this a 2 out of 5. I think it will be remembered, in my opinion, for me, as Errol Flynn's first movie. Good Jeopardy question. What's Errol Flynn's first movie? Oh, Captain Blood, 1935. Other than that, in a year that also spawned, in my opinion, a far more superior C movie, Mutiny on the Bounty, which we reviewed earlier on, I just think it gets lost in that kind of mix. It's not as good as Mutiny on the Bounty. It's a little cartoonish at times, so I give it a 2 out of 5 for aura. So let's recap. 3.5 for plot, 2.5 for acting, 3.0 for directing/cinematography, 3.5 for soundtrack and sound editing, and a 2.0 for aura, giving Captain Blood a 14.5 out of 25 and a score of 58.
One of the greatest stories in all literature. One of the screen's finest achievements. David Copperfield, the Charles Dickens classic, brought to the screen by a mighty cast of superb artists. W.C. Fields as Micawber, Lionel Barrymore as Dan Peggotty, Madge Evans as Agnes, Maureen O'Sullivan as Dora, Edna May Oliver as Aunt Betsy, Louis Stone as Mr. Wickfield, Frank Lawton, David as a youth, Freddie Bartholomew, David as a boy.
It's the 1935 movie adaptation of the literary classic David Copperfield, of course, written by none other than Charles Dickens, released by MGM, and it's based on the novel that is called The Personal History, Adventures, Experience, and Observation of David Copperfield the Younger. That's the complete title of it. Now, obviously, there's a reason that they dwindled it down to just David Copperfield. That title is too darn long. A lot of characters and incidents from the novels were left out, notably David's time at Salem House boarding school. The one character he met at Salem House was retained for the film as a head boy of the school that David attended after his Aunt Betsy Trotwood gained custody of him. So a lot of differences from the book, but this movie is only a little over 2 hours long, so when you have a novel, you got to cut some things out, unless you want like an 8-hour movie or a miniseries. And in 1935, I don't think they were doing miniseries. The story was adapted by Hugh Walpole, an English novelist, and directed by George Cukor, who did many really highly critically acclaimed and classic films, including The Philadelphia Story in 1940. He did Gaslight in 1944 and Adam's Rib in 1949, and plenty more as well other than that. Now, the screenplay was by Howard Estabrook and Lenore J. Coffey, who was not credited, but I'm crediting Lenore now. When David's father dies, his mother remarries. This is the plot of the film. His new stepfather, Murdstone, extremely mean, played by Basil Rathbone. He has a cruel view on how to raise a child. And when David's mother dies from grief, Murdstone sends David to London, I should say, to work for a living. When he escapes to his Aunt Betsy, life gets better. So it's kind of a two-part film. The first part is David when he's a child, and the second part is when he's kind of going off to, I guess, after high school. The cast includes W.C. Fields, classic comedian and actor, and juggler, according to Wikipedia. A writer as well. He plays Mr. Wilkins Micawber. Lionel Barrymore's in it, of course, most famous for his role as Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life. He plays Daniel Peggotty. Madge Evans plays Agnes Whitfield. And Edna May Oliver plays Aunt Betsy. Now, the production, David O. Selznick really wanted to film this movie. His late Russian father learned English through David Copperfield, the book, and read it to his sons every night. So definitely a part of his childhood right there. Now, Louis B. Mayer, who was Selznick's father-in-law, finally let him do it, but instead he wanted Jackie Cooper young Jackie Cooper, who you might remember as, I believe, Mr. White from the Christopher Reeve Superman series. He wanted Jackie Cooper to be cast as young David Copperfield. He was, of course, a child back then. The role ended up going to Freddie Bartholomew after an extensive search. So David O. Selznick got his way. He didn't think Jackie Cooper was the right fit for the role, and he convinced his father-in-law to let him kind of do what he wanted to. Cedric Gibbons designed a recreation of 19th century London on the MGM backlot. Aunt Betsy's house was filmed at Malibu, as a matter of fact. How about that? They go to Malibu Beach in California and they film an English house. Absolutely amazing. And really interesting note here. Charles Lawton, who we're pretty much familiar with here in 1930 at the 1936 Academy Awards, we would have had another role with Charles Lawton. He was originally cast as Mr. Micawber. They even had a hat made up for him and everything, but he just didn't feel like his performance was great. He hated his performance, as a matter of fact, as Mr. Micawber. He didn't feel like he was a fit when he watched the unedited footage, and he said, you know what, I'm not good, but I know this guy who would be perfect for this role, W.C. Fields. So that's who he recommended, and they borrowed W.C. Fields from Paramount. He was under contract with them for a while, and they were able to get his services. W.C. Fields was Mr. Micawber. He had to read off cue cards, W.C. Fields did, and speak his own accent in the role. If you watch the movie, he does not have an English accent. He has that famed W.C. Fields accent, which is an accent in its own. It's the only film as well in which W.C. Fields does not ad-lib. He's not ad-libbing at all in this film, which, based on what he's saying, is kind of hard to believe, because I can't understand half of his dialogue. I really have to admit that. As far as the reception goes in 1935, it was well received upon its January 1935 release. Had 3 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Film Editing, and Best Director, and it was shown in a lot of countries on TV at Christmas after, of course, it came out in the theater. Let's go on into our review. Starting with the plot, I give the plot a 3.5, or 3 rather, out of 5, not 3.5, 3 out of 5. And the reason I'm doing that is because I really thought the first half was just a heck of a plot. 4.5 or 5-star plot, very strong in the first half. But the second half, I thought, got a little muddled in some of the romantic aspects and some of the friendship aspects, as well as this story about this Uriah Heep character blackmailing his love interest. And I just thought that they tried to cram a lot into the back half of that movie, that it kind of gets a little murky and a little juggled. So the first half was, I think, spectacular. The second half was a little murky. Acting, I give a 4.5 out of 5. I thought Freddie Bartholomew was perfect as David Copperfield. What a great child actor choice. And Nurse Peggotty, just you want to go up to Nurse Peggotty, played by Jessie Ralph in this film, and you want to just hug her, because she is just one of those loving caretaker women who just really would do anything for David Copperfield. As I mentioned, I was confused by W.C. Fields' acting a little bit, and that's the only thing that I would take off from here. I thought he was a good slapstick movement kind of actor in this movie, but the dialogue, I just don't think he delivers dialogue very well in this, and I don't understand what the heck he's saying half the time. It doesn't make any sense to me. As far as the directing and cinematography, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. There's a thunderstorm scene, really a heavy on the heart kind of scene with David Copperfield's mother's death, and as well as there's another one as well with Basil Rathbone's character whipping David Copperfield, just really intense on the screen. Well done, but really, really intense. There was a scene on the boat in the second half where he's saving his friend, or trying to save his friend, and to me that wasn't well done. But the second half of the movie I just thought kind of dragged, even though they were trying to cram a lot of stuff in. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give a 3.5 out of 5. Very good sweeping music for like the drama of it all. Brings the story to a vibrancy. And finally, the overall aura of the film, I give it 3.5 out of 5. Again, first half really outshines. That thunderstorm scene kind of sticks with you. The mother dying, and by the way, the mother was pregnant, giving birth at the time, and David Copperfield's future brother died as well, so that's really a tough one to deal with. But the last half, again, lost in the last half. So, total score here, we got 3 for plot, 4.5 for acting, 3.5 for directing and cinematography, 3.5 for soundtrack and sound editing, and 3 for aura, giving David Copperfield a total of 17.5 out of 25, and a score of 70.
Like this,
Well, speak up. What do you want to say?
I've come to claim the £20 reward for Frankie McPhillip.
Frankie McPhillip?
He's not here. Get out! Get out of here! Let him
The Informer from 1935, a dramatic film released by RKO and kind of about the underside of the Irish War of Independence set in 1920. Not really so much, as it is more of a character kind of study kind of movie. It stars Victor McLaglen as Jippo Nolan, who was an English boxer and World War I vet. Now, Victor McLaglen actually won Best Actor this year for his role. It also stars Heather Angel. 1909 to 1986, she plays Mary McPhillip. By the way, Victor McLaglen died in 1959. 1886 to 1959. Preston Foster, 1900 to 1970, plays Dan Gallagher. My name! He's got my name! The only two instances in movie history that I can remember someone having my name was Preston Foster in The Informer and Michael Douglas in the movie with Glenn Close right now. Anyway, we're not reviewing that movie, we're reviewing The Informer. Preston Foster was a stage and film actor and had a career as a vocalist as well. Margot Graham is in the movie, 1911 and 1982. She plays Katie Madden. She's also known for Three Musketeers. Wallace Ford, 1898 to 1966, plays Frankie McPhillip, who's only in the movie in the beginning. He's the guy that gets informed on and gets killed. He usually plays wisecracking characters. And Una O'Connor, 1880 to 1940, who plays Mrs. McPhillip, Frankie's mother, usually portrayed as a comical wife and a housekeeper and servant, that kind of role. And finally, J.M. Currigan, 1884 to 1964, who plays Terry. Kerrigan was an Irish character actor. The screenplay was written by Dudley Nichols from a novel called The Informer by Liam O'Flaherty. It was directed by John Ford, one of the quintessential, if not the quintessential, Hollywood director, 1894 to 1973, renowned for westerns and adaptations of 20th century novels. 4 Academy Awards for Best Director. 4 of them for Best Director. That's just absolutely an amazing career. The novel had previously been adapted for a British film called The Informer in 1929. And The Informer won Best Film Editing, Director, Actor, Screenplay, and Score as well. I believe it garnered the most Oscars from 1935, as a matter of fact. Did not take home Best Picture, however, it got the most Oscars. As far as the plot goes, Dublin in 1920, that's our setting. Jippo Nolan, who's very, very strong, very brutish, but he's kind of dumb. He's ousted from a rebel organization, I guess the Irish Republican Army it would be, and he's starving. He's got kind of a girl who's, I guess, a prostitute. Her name's Katie. She looks at the window and sees this ad for £10 to go to America. And they're basically kind of daydreaming, saying, wouldn't it be great to start all over again in America? And they kind of say, we're never going to make that much money. But he sees a reward for his old buddy, Frankie McPhillip, a reward for, his capture. So he decides to rat on Frankie McPhillip. He goes to the British folk, I guess, and he gets his £20, and then he spends the entire rest of the movie basically getting drunk and trying to keep it from everyone that he was the one who informed on Frankie McPhillip. However, they discover that slowly but surely, Victor McLaglen's character, Jippo Nolan, was the guy who informed. You end up hating the guy in the movie. So that's kind of the profit of The Informer. The movie profited $225,000 at the box office. It remains one of John Ford's most widely referenced films. And they had a lot of adaptations in other media. It was adapted as a radio play on the July 10th, 1949 and October 17th, 1950 episode of the Screen Guild Theater, the March 28, 1948 episode of the Ford Theater, and on the Academy Award Theater's May 25th, 1946 episode, McLaglen actually reprised his role. So The Informer is everywhere after the success of this 1935 film. We get into our review. As far as the plot goes, I think it's a perfect 5 out of 5. Beginning to end, you're on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen to this guy. You kind of know the outcome, but you love the ride. Nolan's basically wrestling with himself over his decision to inform, money or loyalty, what comes first. and then the consequences, which lead to redemption at the end of the movie. Well, I'm not going to get into the detail there. As far as the acting goes, 4 out of 5, I think McLaughlin really was solid as this bruiser without a brain. His desperation throughout the movie, the way he gets drunk, he really depicts kind of this brutish drunkenness that is not a comical drunkenness. It's just a very, just this guy's unpredictable as he drinks more and more and more throughout the night. The entire movie takes place over the course of one night, too. That's another thing to point out. Directing and cinematography, a 3.5 out of 5. It's very dark, gloomy, and foggy. That's the setting of the whole thing. At times, I think it gets a little bit too dark. There's really just no light, and it's almost that kind of darkness that sometimes makes you just want to kind of fall asleep. So it's a very dark movie, both in theme and in sight as well. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give a 2.5 out of 5. Mostly just incidental kind of music. It does have a theme song that I do remember, and it just sounds like the theme song basically is almost like an Irish take on a sinister kind of song. It fits McLaughlin's character very, very well. The aura, I give a 3.5 out of 5, total aura of the film. The murkiness is really what gets me, and the theme of the consequences, even though if it's a good cause or not, you can be left to your own devices to figure out if that was a good thing that he ratted out Frankie McPhillip or not. But the consequences of doing something like that really come to the forefront and really kind of stick with me in the movie for sure. As far as the complete rundown of my review, I got a 5 for plot, got a 4 for acting, 3.5 for directing / cinematography, a 2.5 for soundtrack and sound editing, and a 3.5 for aura, giving The Informer an 18.5 out of 25 and a score of 74.
No previous convictions?
No, sir.
Jean Valjean, when you come into this court, you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. You have failed to do this, and there is nothing for me to do but to pass sentence on you according to the law.
Well, I didn't mean to steal, sir. What was I to do?
1935's Les Miserables. Now, it's kind of weird that this movie, of course, is not based on the play. It's based on the book, directly from the book. Of course, the play is based on the book as well, but we're not hearing any of the musical numbers that we get from the play. This is kind of a straightforward adaptation of the book in movie form. It's an American drama film starring Frederick March, who I remember mostly from The Best Years of Our Lives, great movie. He plays Jean Valjean. Frederick March, one of Hollywood's most celebrated, versatile stars of the 30s and 40s. He's well known, as I mentioned, for Best Years of Our Lives, but also for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Also, this movie stars Charles Laughton, who we just were talking about from Mutiny on the Bounty, same year. He plays Javert, another villainous character portrayed by Charles Laughton. Based on the famous Victor Hugo novel, it was adapted by W.B. Lipscomb and directed by Richard Boleslavsky. It was the last film for 20th Century Pictures before it merged with Fox Film Corporation to form what we know now as 20th Century Fox. Other cast in the film included Cedric Hardwicke as Bishop Muriel. Career spanned nearly 50 years. He had leading roles in a number of adapted literary classics. He was one of those go-to guys. And Rochelle Hudson, who played Cosette in the film. Now, the plot you probably know well by now. By many, you probably have seen the play many times, maybe the newer version of the movie. Jean Valjean, whose theft of a loaf of bread necessary for his survival lands him in prison for a decade. Upon his release, he's embittered, but soon regains his humanity and compassion with a bishop's help. And he's hunted down by Charles Laughton, played by Javert, I should say, played by Charles Laughton. Because he skipped parole, he kept on not going into to meet with his probation officer, and that's why Javert was so after him. I never really understood that from the play. I don't think they go into it, or maybe they glossed over it a bunch of times, and every time I didn't pay attention to it. But that's basically the reason that Javert was hell-bent on following Jean Valjean. Javert is all about the rules, even if it means not being very compassionate, and kind of a struggle between compassion and the playing by the rules and stuff like that. So, getting into the review of this film, wow, what a delight this film was. I was not expecting much. I love the play. I love the 2012 film, which one of these days we'll be reviewing when we do that year's Academy Awards. I didn't think an early adaptation would be quite as entertaining as the ones now, but you know what? In my opinion, this movie is as good, if not better, than the play. I just thought it was an amazing, amazing movie. So going into the review, I give the plot a 5 out of 5. Perfect score. Excellently follows Jean Valjean from his theft and his life in the gallows to redemption. Cosette, great role, and it really follows the French Revolution well, and just everything from beginning to end is very well followed. The acting, I give a 5 out of 5. I think so far, the movies that I've reviewed, this is the best acted film that I've seen. Frederick March is great as Jean Valjean. You can see the pain and anguish on his face as he makes these decisions. Charles Laughton, I'm getting so much respect for Charles Laughton as the quintessential villain of 1930 cinema. And then, of course, you have Rochelle Hudson, who plays Cosette, who did an absolutely fantastic job throughout this film. The directing and cinematography, I give a 4 out of 5, and I think the most powerful scene that was shot was the sewer scene at the end, where Javert is trying to hunt down Jean Valjean while he's carrying the guy who's Cosette's love interest down into the sewers to rescue him. Just unbelievable cinematography and great directing in this film. It depicts the really dingy kind of side of France back at the French Revolution time really well, especially for a 1935 film. Soundtrack and sound editing, I did get a chance to listen to the whole score. That's what I'm going to do here going forward with these films. If I can do it, if I can get my hands on a copy of the film score. I did get a copy of the film score. It is available on Apple Music, and I just wasn't really wowed by it. I give it a 3 out of 5. It helps the movie along. There's a lot of incidental music that's played during it, but not really that memorable, so that kind of gets the lowest score for me for this movie. The overall aura of the film, I give a 4.5 out of 5. Just an excellent adaptation of the book, and as I mentioned before, perhaps better than the play, at least as good as the play in my opinion, and great, just on par with the 2012 movie/play. Great film. Let's go through our tally here. 5 for plot, 5 for acting, 4.5 for directing/cinematography, a 3 for soundtrack and sound editing, and a 4.5 for aura. That gives Les Miserables from 1935 a 22 out of 25 and a score of 88.
The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, starring Gary Cooper in one of his most heroic roles.
Colonel knows India, McGregor. You don't. You're right, I don't. I'm just a fool Scotch Canadian. Came into your outfit to get action.
You thought what, Mr. McGregor? That you were going after your son, sir. This incident will not change our plans in any respect.
I'd just begun to think I was wrong about you, but I wasn't. You haven't a human bone in your body. There's not a drop of blood in your veins. You're nothing but a...
The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, 1935 American epic adventure drama film brought to us by Paramount. It was loosely adapted from a 1930 autobiography by a British author, Francis Yates Brown. The movie was directed by Henry Hathaway, who lived from 1898 to 1985. Hathaway, best known as the director of westerns starring Randolph Scott and John Wayne. So kind of a western, not really a western feel, I should say, but kind of the same kind of westernish theme in this movie, but it takes place in India. The movie was written by Grover Jones, who lived from 1893 to 1940, William Slavens McNutt, Waldemar Young, John Lee Balderston, and Ahmed Abdullah. Now, the plot tells the story of a group of British cavalrymen and high-ranking officers desperately trying to defend their stronghold and headquarters at Bengal against the rebellious natives during the days of the British Raj. And the subplot is the colonel of this army has to deal with his son, who is called over. His son thinks that the colonel called him over to be in his regiment, and it turns out that wasn't the case. It was a subordinate of the colonel who thought it would be a good idea to have his son come over, so the son volunteered, and it becomes a big-time issue of, do I treat my son with a different set of rules than the others? And the colonel didn't want to do that, so he made things a little more strict on his son, and a lot of events happened after that. The star is Gary Cooper, who plays Lieutenant Alan McGregor. Gary Cooper just getting started in his career as one of the big-time leading men, strong, stoic kind of actors. Franchot Tone, who we saw in Mutiny and the Bounty, he plays Lieutenant John Forsyth. And Richard Cromwell stars as Lieutenant Donald Stone. Now, Cromwell, the pinnacle of his acting career came with the movie Jezebel in 1938, as well as Young Mr. Lincoln in 1939. Guy Standing plays Colonel Tom Stone, who is Lieutenant Donald Stone's father. And really weird story. This guy died in 1937, 1873 to 1937, so just a couple years after this was filmed. He dies of a rattlesnake bite at age 63. Really just strange, and considering where this movie's filmed, it's actually filmed in California and not India, but after having known this and seeing this film, I keep thinking, watch out for the rattlesnakes guy. A couple years after, I guess he didn't. Douglas Drumbill is also in this movie. He plays a rebel leader named Muhammad Khan, who frequently utters the misquoted line, "We have ways to make men talk." Originally, it was released in 1931, but it originally was supposed to be released, I should say, in 1931, but it had to be delayed 4 years due to the film stock crisis, in which most location footage deteriorated due to high temperatures. It was actually released in January 1935, so I guess they had a lot of footage, and they got lost and destroyed in the fire. The movie grossed $49 million. As we get into our review now of The Lives of a Bengal Lancer. Say that 5 times fast. The plot, I give a 3 out of 5. I think the Lieutenant Stone situation with his relations with his father was very well done. Gary Cooper kind of becomes the father figure himself as Lieutenant Alan McGregor, kind of the mediator of the two, and the guy with kind of a heart. Pretty much, as opposed to just plain duty. He doesn't like Colonel Stone, the father, because of his rigid attention to duty and not really having much of a heart. The ammunitions raid at the end, the events leading up to that and the logistics of it, I thought were a little hard to follow, or a little, I don't want to say implausible, but a little bit not explained well enough in this film. And Colonel Stone's kidnapping by the beautiful slave, that really wasn't something that was gone into, I think, in much depth. And I kind of missed out on that until I read the plot summary. I said, oh, the beautiful slave kidnapped Colonel Stone. I guess I should have drawn that conclusion. The acting, I give a 3.5 out of 5. Cooper was very solid, I thought. He was very impassioned as Lieutenant McGregor. I thought the Lieutenant John Forsyth, played by Franchot Tone, who I thought was great in Mutiny on the Bounty. I just thought he was a little bit too annoying and snarky in this role. He was just very condescending in this role. And I know that's what his character was supposed to be, but it just kind of takes away a little bit from the movie, I think. Lieutenant Stone, young officer, I thought he was a little bit bratty. Came off a little bit bratty, Cromwell's character. And Colonel Stone, very curmudgeonly. I like the Colonel Stone character, who would kind of tease you throughout the entire movie of, oh, this guy's going to have a heart. He's going to break, and he's going to actually, become a human. And then he just reverts back to his dutiful ways. Directing and cinematography, I give it 4 out of 5. Very lush landscape, making California really seem like you're in the midst of India. The end battle scene was very well done, and they have a couple nighttime scenes of the encampment with the stars shining overhead. I really like those as well, so good job for a 1935 film with directing and cinematography. Soundtrack, I give it 2.5 out of 5. Again, just incidental music, not much remembered about this movie, soundtrack and sound editing-wise. And aura, I give it 3 out of 5 total. The themes of preferential treatment, sense of duty over your blood relatives, over in this case, your son, serving in the military with you. That kind of overshadows a lot. As far as the straight action goes and the acting, I think it kind of gets lost in the mix. Again, especially with a movie like Mutiny and the Bounty that year. So 3 out of 5 for aura. As we go through the final tallies, we have 3 for plot, 3.5 for acting, 4 for directing / cinematography, 2.5 for soundtrack, 3 for aura, giving The Lives of a Bengal Lancer a 16 out of 25 and a score of 64. It's the 1935 screen adaptation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, American romance fantasy film, of course based on William Shakespeare's play. Now this movie was directed by Max Reinhardt, who lived from 1873 to 1943, as well as William Dieterle, 1893 to sometime in the 1920s, I think 1921. I can't read my handwriting. Now, Dieterle also did The Devil and Daniel Webster, The Story of Louis Pasteur, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So he was pretty big on those screen adaptations. But then again, a lot of movies back then were adaptations of really big hit books. Life of Emile Zola, he also did that one. That won Best Picture. I believe that following year, 1937, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, we'll get there at some point, I'm sure. It stars Ian Hunter, 1900 to 1975, as Theseus, Duke of Athens. James Cagney, in kind of a weird role. Of course, he's used to the gangster kind of roles. James Cagney, 1899 to 1986. He plays Bottom the Weaver. Of course, James Cagney in Public Enemy in 1931, probably the role that he's best remembered in. Also, Taxi in 1932, Angels with Dirty Faces in 1938, and the movie White Heat. Love that movie. I haven't seen it in years. That was in 1949. Mickey Rooney, was this his first on-screen appearance? It may have been. Mickey Rooney, 1920 to 2014. He plays Puck, or Robin Goodfellow, who's a fairy. Olivia de Havilland, in her first screen role, of course, she was in Captain Blood. We reviewed that. She had a big year in 1935, big introductory year. She plays Hermia, who's in love with Lysander. Joe E. Brown, 1891 to 1973, plays Flute. One of the most popular comedians of the 30s and 40s was Joe E. Brown. And looking at the extras on the DVD that I got, he's all over the place. He seems to be one of the more popular actors to be featured in a lot of the press junkets for A Midsummer Night's Dream. Dick Powell plays Lysander, 1904 to 1963. Man, what a cast. Victor Jory, 1902 to 1982, plays Oberon, King of the Fairies. They really did some neat things to depict him on the screen. The movie was produced by Henry Blank, 1901 to 1981, and Hal B. Wallace, 1898 to 1986. Wallace also produced Casablanca in 1942 and True Grit in 1969. So he had a pretty storied career after this movie. Warner Brothers released this film. It was adapted by Charles Kenyon and Mary C. McCall Jr., and it was taken from Reinhardt's Hollywood Bowl production from the previous year. So they put on a production of this movie in Hollywood on the stage, or a production of the play, I should say, on the stage. Loved it so much, they immediately got a screen contract to film it, and they did just that. The film's about the events surrounding the marriage of the Duke of Athens, Theseus, and the Queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta. It includes the adventures of 4 young Athenian lovers and a group of 6 amateur actors who are controlled and manipulated by the fairies who inhabit the forest in which most of the story is set. So very, very dreamy, very fantasy-oriented with a romance subplot, comedic romance subplot, I guess you can kind of call it. Casting notes. Many actors had never performed Shakespeare previously and would not do so again, especially James Cagney and Joe E. Brown, even though they were praised for their performances. A lot of critics agree that Powell was miscast as Lysander. Powell agreed that he was miscast as Lysander. De Havilland originally played the role of Hermia in Max Reinhardt's Hollywood Bowl production, and Mickey Rooney was Puck in the production as well, so they brought them over from stage to screen. As far as the production goes, Reinhardt did not speak English, so Dieterle was his interpreter. The movie was banned in Nazi Germany due to the Jewish background of Reinhardt, and the composer Felix Mendelssohn, who they adapted his music to the screen. The shooting schedule had to be rearranged after Rooney broke his leg while skiing. He was just, 15 at the time. Rooney claims that Jack L. Warner was furious that he broke his leg while skiing and threatened to break his other leg after killing him. So instead of saying, hey man, how you doing? Is everything okay? You're on the mend? Your health comes first? Nope. How dare you break your leg, is what he apparently said, according to Mickey Rooney, who's been known to kind of tell some tall tales. Just look at the Dana Carvey imitations. Felix Mendelssohn's music was used but reorchestrated by Eric Wolfgang Korngold. It was distributed at the time, a little bit of a confusion, as cinemas entered into a contract to show the film but had the right to pull out within a specified period of time and established an estimated 2,971 cancellations of the movie, which is a new record. As far as the reception, it failed at the box office. Not really well reviewed either. And again, looking at the DVD extras, they did a lot of press for this movie. And if you go on YouTube, tons of little vignettes about, come on out, this is the greatest movie ever. You got to see this movie. You got to see this movie. They really were kind of begging people to see this movie. It does hold an 88% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 8 reviews. And the cinematography, the use of Mendelssohn's music and dance sequences were praised. Some of the other stuff was not. So let's get into the review now of 1935's A Midsummer Night's Dream. I give the plot a 2 out of 5. I thought it was a confusing plot. I've never read the Shakespeare play. Never really got too much into Shakespeare. There's only a handful of Shakespeare plays that I can follow and do actually like. One of them being Romeo and Juliet, the other one being Hamlet, and maybe a few more that I've forgotten since my high school days. But this one just confused the hell out of me. It was all over the place. It just, I don't know why this acting troupe was there. I don't know what the reason for some of these things happening was. I don't know why the King of the Fairies wanted to teach his wife a lesson. I don't get it. I'm sure if I read the play, I'd probably get it. And if I read the Cliff Notes, I would get it more. But I just didn't understand the plot too well. Acting, I didn't like the acting either. 1.5 out of 5. This is the lowest I've given a movie so far during this podcast. I thought, even though Powell was critiqued as being miscast as Lysander, and he agreed, I thought James Cagney was incredibly miscast. I see James Cagney as a gangster kind of actor, almost kind of like Robert De Niro plays mob guys. I mean, James Cagney was just completely not in the right role. De Havilland, kind of like Captain Blood, De Havilland with a big breakthrough performance here. I didn't think she set the place on fire. I guess it wouldn't be until maybe Gone with the Wind where she really kind of separated herself. Joey Brown, I guess I don't know why they would cast a comedian like that in that role. He was okay, I guess. And Mickey Rooney, I just found Mickey Rooney just extremely annoying in the movie. I guess he was supposed to be playing an annoying fairy character, but I don't know. He just a little off-putting there. Directing and cinematography, I got to give that a 3.5 out of 5. I thought the fairyland kind of set was really well done, with a lot of camera trickery for 1935 or 1934, whenever this movie was filmed. A lot of ghosty kind of camera work, dreamlike state. The effects were very well done. Very well done. I really liked that about this movie. And the soundtrack and sound editing I thought was spectacular. 4 out of 5. The Mendelssohn soundtrack was great, and it was really well adapted, so I thought they did a great, fantastic job on that. And the overall aura of the movie, I give a pretty good score as well, 3.5 out of 5. I think mostly I remember this for the fantasy aspect of it, the dreamlike state, and the music, and the plot, and the acting obviously gets lost in the mix. But yeah, the screen stuff I do remember as far as the fantasy aspect of it. So good score there. So total, here we go. 2 for plot. We have 1.5 for acting. We have 3.5 for directing and cinematography. 4 for soundtrack and sound editing. And 3.5 for aura, giving A Midsummer Night's Dream a 14.5 out of 25 and a score of 58.
Singing for you.
1935's Naughty Marietta, which was a film based on an operetta of the same name by Victor Herbert. And it stars Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. Those two are basically, they go hand in hand back in those old movies. Jeanette MacDonald, 1903 to 1965, she plays a princess who flees an arranged marriage. And she sails for New Orleans, and then she's rescued by Captain Richard Warrington, who's played by Nelson Eddy, who lived from 1901 to 1967. Now, 5 of Victor Herbert's most famous songs came from the score of this movie. It had a very illustrious soundtrack, including the Italian street song, Oh, Sweet Mystery of Life, that song too. The film was written by Francis Goodrich, Albert Hackett, John Lee Maheen, and Rita Johnson Young. Posthumously written by Rita Johnson Young. She died some years earlier. Other cast, you have Frank Morgan, who played Governor Gaspard Denard. Frank Morgan, you might realize or remember the name from The Wizard of Oz. He played the wizard. Elsa Lanchester played Madame Denard. Douglas Dumbrill played Prince de Namur de la Bonfim. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Probably not. But anyway, moving on. Douglas Shearer won the Academy Award for Sound. So it won 1 Academy Award, and that was for Best Sound, I guess with the music and all. In 2003, it was selected for preservation by the USNFR. And in pop culture, the song Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life was used in Mel Brooks' 1974 comedy Young Frankenstein. Also used in the TV show All in the Family, and elsewhere as well. It's a very famous song. In the movie Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown, Naughty Marietta is the in-flight movie on the plane going to England. Interesting choice right there. It grossed $2,057,000, profiting $407,000. So, pretty decent return on Naughty Marietta. Basically, the gist of the plot is a woman of royalty in France is arranged to be married to somebody that she doesn't love, so she's looking to get out of this wedding, and her people say, nope, there's no way you can do it. So she finds her maid, who says that she's going to be sailing on this voyage to New Orleans with a bunch of other single ladies to find husbands over in New Orleans, kind of middle class or serfdom kind of women. So they sail to New Orleans. She disguises herself as her maid, sneaks out, gets on a ship, and the ship gets taken over by pirates, and then they get rescued by this band of mercenaries led by Nelson Eddy's character. He takes them safely to New Orleans, and then she slowly falls in love with him. After not really liking him, she then falls in love, and they sing a lot of songs in the process. So let's go down to the review here. We have plot 2.5 out of 5. Kind of a run-of-the-mill romance, riches to rags kind of plot. I don't think anything too special. Maybe for the time it was something different, but not really anything that sets itself from anything else. I do like the historical background of the movie. I like the depiction of New Orleans, and I like the pirate hijacking scene, which was pretty intense for 1935. The pirate hijack for a movie like this too. As far as the acting, I only give the acting a 2 out of 5. I think Nelson Eddy's character is completely unlikable. He's just this guy that we're supposed to like, we're supposed to be rooting for, and supposed to be saying, hey, thank goodness they're together. But I find him to be pompous. I find him to be way too confident in himself compared to everyone else. I just don't like that kind of character, and that's exactly the character that Nelson Eddy plays in this. Other than saving them from the pirate thing, the pirate hijacking, I just don't see how Nelson Eddy is that much likable in this movie. Jeanette MacDonald is somewhat unlikable in this, too. I don't know. She just doesn't seem very affable in the movie. Doesn't seem like she really took to her cast members who are, on the plebeian end of things, I guess, during their voyage. I do like the governor, the guy who played the Wizard of Oz. I thought he was pretty jolly and lively and everything in his role. So I do like him, and I liked his wife. I thought she was pretty funny. The Elsa Lanchester character, I thought she was snobby in a comical kind of sense. As far as the directing and cinematography, I give that a 2.5 out of 5. I like the scene changes. I like the depiction of France. Scenes on the boat were very well done, and the scenes in Louisiana. However, it does kind of give me a bit of a lower budget feel than some of the blockbusters like Mutiny on the Bounty, in that it doesn't really feel quite as authentic as those movies do. Kind of like maybe they didn't have quite as much money to pour out in that situation. Soundtrack and sound editing, I give the best score out of all, which is a 3.5 out of 5. Very catchy sing-along songs that withhold the test of time, and a good soundtrack as well. Somewhat loud and abrasive, though, as far as the male voice. Nelson Eddy's voice at times can get really deep and really loud, kind of unpleasantly loud, if you ask me. As far as the acting goes, or the aura goes, I should say, I give the aura a 2 out of 5. Not a movie that you're going to remember, or at least that I'm going to remember too much as time goes by. Maybe a few of the songs from it, but as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a run-of-the-mill love story of just kind of a one-dimensional I'm a man's man kind of character that just doesn't resonate in modern times. So we go back to the complete review. 2.5 out of 5 for plot. We have 2 for acting. We have 2.5 for directing cinematography. 3.5 for soundtrack and sound editing. And 2 for aura, giving Naughty Marietta a 12.5 out of 25 and a score of 50%.
Ruggles of Red Gap.
Never mind, Mr. Floud. He can stay here. You're coming with me. I think I should speak to Mr. Floud, sir.
And to think I sent you out to take care of him.
I'm terribly sorry, madam.
Perhaps I should have inquired of his lordship about your habits. Come, Ruggles, you better go to bed.
I think I'm going to dub 1935 the year of Charles Laughton. We have another Charles Laughton movie in which he's a likable character, believe it or not. It's called Ruggles of Red Gap from 1935. It's a comedy film, and I don't believe we've done a comedy film yet this year. It was directed by Leo McCarey, who also did Duck Soup, The Awful Truth, Going My Way, and An Affair to Remember. So he's done both dramas and comedies. Duck Soup, a lot of people say, are one of the better comedies of all time. Charles Laughton plays Ruggles, the gentleman's gentleman, I guess the butler, if you want to use a more uncouth word. Mary Boland is in the movie as well. She plays Effie Floud, 1882 to 1965. Charlie Ruggles, 1886 to 1970, plays Egbert Floud, or Flood. I guess it's Flood. I think that's what they said in the movie, Flood, F-L-O-U-D. And Charlie Ruggles, a well-known comedy actor, character actor, I should say, back in the 30s. Zazu Pitts plays Mrs. Judson, 1894 to 1963. Roland Young as the Earl of Bernstead, 1887 to 1953. And Leela Hyams, 1905 to 1977, plays Nell. Now, this movie was based on a best-selling 1915 novel by Harry Wilson, adapted by Humphrey Pearson, screenplay by Walter de Leon and Harlan Thompson. And it's the story of a newly rich American couple from the West, in the frontier area, who go to Paris, and the husband, who's a rather uncouth cowboy type, gunslinger type, I guess, but just happy-go-jolly kind of guy, he wins a poker game against this really, highfalutin lord or whoever he is. And the stakes of the poker game were the guy's butler, who is obviously Ruggles, who's this very proper butler who, generation to generation, it's been passed down. His family has known nothing else. So he gets the shock of a lifetime by having to be in the service now of this uncouth Wild West family. He goes out there, and in the midst of everything going on, he finds independence and ends up finding himself and basically knowing that he has self-worth. Pretty cool story as far as lessons to be learned. Now, this movie was actually selected in 2014 for preservation in the National Film Registry, so a late entry, but it did get the entry. And it was adapted as a Broadway musical in 1915, the same year the book was published. Also a silent film in 1918 and 1923, so plenty of versions of Ruggles of Red Gap before the talkie version. The color musical version, called Fancy Pants, was released in 1950, starring Bob Hope and Lucille Ball, so kind of a remake of the movie under a different name. So let's get into our review now of Ruggles of Red Gap. The plot, I give the plot a 4 out of 5. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was a really funny movie, especially for 1935. A lot of times these old-time comedies kind of lose their luster because we live in different times. Very predicamental, if I'm making up a word. A lot of predicaments. among this classic movie. You got a proper person basically living in an improper place and time, I guess, which just hilarity ensues, basically. You get a real big-time sense of American nationalism, especially toward the end of the movie, and independence as well. That's a huge theme of this movie. And he kind of finds himself. It's almost a comedy character study of this Ruggles character who's just so demure and so silent and just completely in the service of those who are his master, I guess. It makes him sound a little bit like he's more of an indentured servant, but he really is, and I guess he kind of is in the British sense of things. As far as the acting goes, I give the acting a 4 out of 5. I think Lawton was brilliant as the standoffish Ruggles character, where you really genuinely say, every situation that he gets into, you say, how is he going to handle this? And that's a total talent for this actor, Lawton, and I'm really gaining such an appreciation of Charles Lawton, especially this year, in 1935, than I ever had before. I had seen Mutiny on the Bounty before, and I knew he was great in that, but Les Mis and now this movie, really gaining such a great appreciation for Charles Lawton. And unfortunately, his looks probably kind of didn't give him too much of the limelight back then, but he definitely deserved a lot of respect. Roland Young, who plays the Earl of Bernstein, I thought he was great as a kind of a bemused British man, this kind of understated reactionary guy who didn't really get bowled over by anything at all. He treated everything like it was run-of-the-mill, even crazy things that are happening. And there's really a really great scene in this movie where he's with this girl at a party and he's playing the drums. I'm not going to get into it too much if you want to see the movie, but I thought that was probably, in my opinion, the most hilarious moment of the movie. My only quip with the acting is the Wild West stuff was a little over the top. I think Charlie Ruggles was a little over the top in the movie. Nothing to make it that much worse, but that's my only quip about the acting. I give the directing and cinematography a 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was very well filmed for the movie that it was. Plenty of locations. They depicted Paris pretty well. A lot of scene changes and stuff like that, and location changes. Soundtrack and sound editing, nothing of note. I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5 just for not detracting from the movie, but really nothing memorable whatsoever in that category. Overall aura, I give a 4 out of 5. I think it was absolutely great after seeing Charles Lawton in 2 roles in 2 movies this year that you just wanted to wring his neck. The Mutiny on the Bounty and Les Mis playing Javert. You just wanted to just choke him. In this movie, you really want to root for him. He's such a good guy in this movie with a great heart, and really finds himself. You really root for him. It really is, a great character study, as I mentioned before, and a great theme at the end, and just you get some patriotism. I could see how maybe the British would not be a big fan of the gist of this movie, because it does kind of look upon them as they have servants in their employ and stuff like that, and people aren't equal in England, so I could kind of see that they would kind of take some kind of offense to that. But great movie. Overall, we got a 4 for plot, we got a 4 for acting, we got a 3.5 out of 5 for directing and cinematography, a 2.5 for soundtrack and sound editing, and a 4 for aura, giving Ruggles of Red Gap an 18 out of 25 and an overall score of 72.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is a pleasure to present this award to you for producing the best picture of 1935, Mutiny on the Bounty. Mr. Capra, it is obvious but nevertheless true for me to say that I am happy that Mutiny on the Bounty won this award. And the several thousand men and women who played in this picture, I'm sure will share this happiness with me. Most of all, I know that Frank Lloyd, the great director of this picture, Albert Lewin, my associate, great writers, Talbot Jennings, Harry Wilson, and Jules Firth.
1935 screwball musical comedy Top Hat, starring, of course, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Their probably most popular movie together. Fred Astaire from 1989, or 1899, I should say, to 1987. That's his lifespan. He played an American dancer named Jerry Travers. He comes to London to star in a show produced by Horace Hardwick, played by the very, very funny comedic character actor Edward Everett Horton, who lived from 1886 to 1970. And he meets and attempts to impress Dale Tremont, played by Ginger Rogers, 1911 to 1995, to win her affection. It also features Eric Blore as Hardwick's valet Bates, 1887 to 1959. Eric Rhodes, 1906 to 1990, played Alberto Bedini, a fashion designer who is a rival for Dale's affections. Helen Broderick, 1891 to 1959, is Hardwick's long-suffering wife, Madge. Now, this movie was written by Alan Scott and Dwight Taylor. It was directed by Mark Sandrich, who died pretty young, died only at age 44 or 45. He died of a sudden heart attack, so he was a pretty big talent who died at an early age. The songs were written by Irving Berlin, 1889 to 1989, 100 years old, wow. And what iconic songs. We're talking about songs like Top Hat, White Tie and Tails, Dancing Cheek to Cheek. They've both become American song classics, as well as many other ones. Actually, the Cheek to Cheek segment was referred to in the movie The Purple Rose of Cairo, as well as The Green Mile. It was the most successful picture, as I mentioned, of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers' partnership. It was Astaire's most successful after the movie Easter Parade, and it was second place in worldwide box office receipts for 1935. As far as the production goes, the filming began in April of 1935. It cost $620,000 to make. The script was panned by many critics, alleging that it was kind of a rewrite of the movie The Gay Divorcee. The big white set took up the largest share of the film's production costs. I guess that was the Venice set. They do a really unbelievable set production value of Venice. There was also of note an incident with feathers in this movie. Ginger Rogers wore a dress made of ostrich feathers during one of the dance numbers. Fred Astaire didn't like it, and because it shed. And he kind of yelled at Rogers, apparently, who got really upset. Her mother stormed up onto the set of the movie and yelled at Fred Astaire, who kind of came back and kind of lightheartedly changed the lyrics to Dancing Cheek to Cheek with something feather-related, and made it funny and lighthearted and all that stuff, and everything was forgotten. As far as the box office goes, the film earned $1,782,000 in the U.S. and Canada, $1,420,000 elsewhere, and RKO, the picture company, made a profit of $1,325,000, the most profitable movie of the studios in the 1930s. Basically, mainly positive reviews for Top Hat. As far as my review goes, here we go. The plot. I give the plot a 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was a very, very fun, kind of farcical plot about mistaken identity. That's what the whole movie kind of revolves around. She's mistaking the Fred Astaire's character's identity with the character played by Edward Everett Horton. And Horton's wife in the movie thinks that Ginger Rogers is talking about her husband making advances on her. And just everything gets all messed up, and just hilarity ensues, basically. My only gripe with the plot is I thought the romance angle was a little bit thin between Astaire and Rogers, but they play it off pretty well. The acting, I give a 4 out of 5. I thought Astaire's charm is amazing in the movie, and everyone always says Astaire was not the best-looking guy. Ginger Rogers was a knockout back in the day, and you really get this believability between the two that they both had interest in each other. Of course, Ginger Rogers, very kind of demure in the movie, somewhat. Her dancing is great with Astaire as well. I thought that Edward Everett Horton's character of Hardwick was a great comedy performance. I remember this guy from basically narrating like little vignette cartoons when I was growing up. This Edward Everett Horton. It's a very, very distinct voice and a distinct delivery as well. My only quip with acting was Eric Rhodes. His character was a bit over the top as the Bedini character, just a little bit over the top as far as the comedic relief goes. Directing and cinematography, I give a 100% perfect score, 5 out of 5. I thought the choreography was spectacular. The scenery was really great for the big screen in 1935. The sets were so elaborately done, and just everything was just really, really well orchestrated. And how could you not give the soundtrack and sound editing of Top Hat a 5 out of 5? I mean, these are some of the most iconic songs of all time. Dancing Cheek to Cheek, Top Hat, White Tie and Tails, and the final number, the Piccolino, which, what a great song that is. Just a really, really great musical score to just sing along to. As far as the aura goes, I give Top Hat a total of 4 out of 5. I thought the dancing was spectacular. The iconic images of Rogers and Astaire on screen and the scenery really makes this movie. I think that if you're thinking about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, you're thinking about Top Hat for sure. I mean, just the quintessential Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers movie. Some great ones in there as well. Easter Parade was a great one too. And I'm not sure if that got nominated for Best Picture, but it probably did. Knowing the number of nominees every year in this time period, we'll probably get around to doing that when we do that year's. But great aura to this movie, a movie that you'll probably remember for a while. So going down the complete review list, we have 3.5 for plot, we have 4 for acting, we have 5 for directing and cinematography, 5 for soundtrack and sound editing, and 4 for aura, giving Top Hat a total of 21.5 out of 25 and a score of 86.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is a pleasure to present this award to you for producing the best picture of 1935, Mutiny on the Bounty. Mr. Capra, it is obvious but nevertheless true for me to say that I am happy that Mutiny on the Bounty won this award. And the several thousand men and women who played in this picture, I'm sure will share this happiness with me. Most of all, I know that Frank Lloyd, the great director of this picture, Albert Lewin, my associate, the great writers, Talbot Jennings, Kerry Wilson, and Jules Fett.
All right, how I would have voted in 1936 for the 8th Academy Awards. This is a really, really tough year. I mean, we have 12 nominees in 1936 for movies filmed in 1935, or shown in 1935, I should say. And I really kind of dwindled it down between 3 movies. And it was really a tough one to pick, at least between 2 of them. I dwindled it down between the eventual Best Picture winner, Mutiny on the Bounty, Les Miserables, and Top Hat. Which one was the best? I dwindled it down even further between Les Mis and Top Hat. And I love both movies, and they are so different from each other and great in 2 completely different kinds of ways. But I will have to go with Top Hat. Top Hat is my pick for Best Picture of 1935. Love Les Mis. I kind of wanted to go with it, and as I went along in these reviews and I watched the movies and I went along, I said that Les Mis is really going to be tough to beat. And I remember seeing Top Hat years ago and not really being bowled over by it. But this time that I saw it, I really gained an appreciation for the American musical and really gained an appreciation for the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers to an extent as well. I just thought this movie was just elegant, classy all the way, just that ultimate big screen kind of feel to this movie with the music. Les Mis was great too. Les Mis just tugs at the heartstrings. Mutiny on the Bounty was a close third too. It was a great movie and it was the best picture that year, but I just think overall Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and Top Hat really just was the best of all of those movies that I reviewed from the 1936 8th Annual Academy Awards.